I'm Todd Schrupp with this week's edition of Beyond 140. Here's how it works. If you follow me on Twitter, @ToddTVG, you know you can reach out to me anytime with questions or comments, but I only have 140 characters to use to answer you. So with this show, I can take as long as I want, and we have a lot of good questions this week. Let's get right to them, starting with MC Moffamouth. @ToddTVG, do you see this Derby shaping up to be one of the better betting and handicapping Kentucky Derbies in recent memory? I see about 10 live horses. I would agree with that. The one thing I would say, I don't think it's going to be, say, like a Giacomo year or Mind That Bird where we're going to see a shocking upset. I think there's a couple of things that distinguish this group. First and foremost, they're a very deep group. So often, I was talking about this with Simon Bray, you'll see horses who are brilliant in their 2-year-old season, and then they fizzle out in their 3-year-old season. So far, that 2-year-old form is holding up into the following 3-year-old season, which suggests to me this is a very talented group. And that's saying something, considering the 3-year-old crop last year was rather remarkable. I am so excited about what's shaping up with this year's Kentucky Derby. Not from the standpoint you're going to find a 20-to-1 shot, but I think you're going to find 6-to-1, 8-to-1 on a horse with a lot of ability. And when you look across the board in this year's Kentucky Derby, that's what you're looking at. A lot of those prices are going to be 6 to 8-to-1 on legitimate contenders. Yes, I'm very excited about how this Kentucky Derby is shaping up. Our next question comes from Nick McMacken. Will HRTV be offered on DirecTV with this new merger? Also, will you guys, TVG, be recording any new shows this year like Inside the Mind of a Horse Player and etc.? When the merger was announced with HRTV, that was part of the thinking. One message, one entity to expand distribution. That is going to be a huge advantage, whether it be DirecTV or other outlets. You are going to see distribution grow because of this merger between TVG and HRTV. So indeed, one message, whether it's DirecTV or someone else, is going to lead to more expansion of coverage in horse racing, more outlets. As far as programming at TVG, well, there's a world of possibilities in the year that is ahead because of what's happened between the combined resources of TVG and HRTV. I do like the show that you're talking about, Inside the Mind of a Horse Player. We profiled 2 horse players who play the game professionally. I'd like to see an expansion of that. But yes, you're going to see a lot coming out over the next year. Our next point comes in from Peter Frederick, who's a horse owner, and he asks, do you think the lack of non-conditioned allowance races are a byproduct of not enough stakes quality horses? Well, Peter, I know you own horses here in California, so let me speak to that. Speaking of my colleague Simon Bray, we talked about this a lot. When he was training, there were many non-conditioned allowance races on the grass that essentially were graded stakes races. So if you just look at that condition on the turf, that is depleted dramatically. No longer do you have, for example, back in those days, you'd have the late Bobby Frankel with maybe a European import or Neil Drysdale bringing a horse in, any number of possibilities, and they were deep fields. The bottom line is you're absolutely right. The non-conditioned allowance turf races have suffered in field size and quality as really the horse population has changed over the years here in Southern California. I still think on the East Coast, you get better races at that non-conditioned allowance, but it certainly has changed here in California. And bottom line is, as time marches on, so do the conditions in horse racing in Southern California. This comes in from Maya Fitzpatrick. Do you think any of the sires we have now will have a lasting influence on breeding here and abroad? Oh, of course. Look, every generation has a great sire. I think there's a lot of great potential sires out there, sires who've already established themselves like a Tappet, but you'd have to point to Giants Causeway. Giants Causeway was by a sire of sires that had a lasting influence, and usually those types of influences pass it on down. I would first and foremost point to Giants Causeway. I think we'll be talking about his influence for decades to come. So yes, I think it's a very good time in the world of thoroughbred breeding, and there are many sires you could point to, but I would start with your question with Giants Causeway because you asked, would that be here? Would that be abroad? Giants Causeway, all over the world, his influence is being felt, and that'll be for generations to come. Our next question comes from Junior Melendez. Do you think the Kentucky Derby point system is here to stay, and why? I'll be honest with you, Junior. When it first started, I thought, I don't know about this, but they have made tweaks over the years, adding certain races and making adjustments. So I think what we have now is a fair system. I don't believe the previous system prior to the point system where you got so much credit for the purse earnings that you had as a 2-year-old, and we've seen that. A lot of times the 2-year-old, we talked about this at the top, the 2-year-old crop doesn't last over into the 3-year-old season, so you get horses who end up in the starting gate who didn't belong there under the previous system. I think the Derby point system has been a good thing. I think the adjustments they have made along the way have helped it get even better, and I'm sure there are more adjustments to come. So I like the Kentucky Derby point system. I don't think it's like other sports, say maybe the NCAA basketball tournament where you're looking at teams, oh, they should have got in, or college football, oh, that team should have got in. I think for the most part, we get the 20 best 3-year-olds there in the Kentucky Derby, so I indeed like the point system. I would say I think there's a residual effect, and that is there's not as much emphasis now on those 2-year-old races in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile because it doesn't ultimately determine who's going to get in the Kentucky Derby the following year. Lou Fish sends in, with a little less than 2 months until the Kentucky Derby, do you have a sleeper horse picked out yet? I have to give my colleague Paul LaDuca credit for this one. He pointed out a horse to me, Keen Ice, who was 3rd in the Risen Star for Dale Romans. The sire is Curlin, owned by Donegal Racing. When you look at this horse's pedigree, Keen Ice is a horse that's going to improve with each start. It's going to be perfect for the 1.25-mile distance. And like I said, I went back and watched that replay of the Risen Star after Paul LaDuca pointed out to me. I know he likes Keen Ice, and I would have to say, by extension, that would be my sleeper horse as we sit 2 months out till the Kentucky Derby. But incredibly, even sitting 60 days out, I'm probably going to come up with another sleeper horse, but Keen Ice would be the name that I would be thinking about. Our next question, when will we see HRTV operations moving to the TVG studios in Westchester? That sounds like a very informed question. Let's put it this way. We are already seeing some of that take place. Pursuit of the Crown is going to have an episode from the TVG studios. However, I will be on site in the HRTV studios this Sunday. It's a long process, but the bottom line is this. When TVG made the transition in their studios to high definition, they essentially outfitted the facilities for 2 networks. That's one of the reasons that this merger was able to happen. So eventually, yes, that's all going to happen. It's going to take some time. We're in the early stages of that, but it's happening as we speak. Our final point and question here on Beyond 140, Todd, may we expect to see the work show again from the Kentucky Derby? Any chance of daily reporting from the spa at Saratoga? That's another loaded question. Obviously, the works is something, whether it was on HRTV or whether it was on TVG, that everyone's come to expect for the Kentucky Derby. I can tell you that, again, this is all in a negotiating process, and we hope these things come together. As far as coverage at Saratoga, that's another thing that has to be worked out. But the bottom line is this. With this acquisition of HRTV and the merging of all the resources between TVG and HRTV, you, the customer, are going to benefit because we are going to have expansive coverage from around the country all year long. Be patient. There are announcements forthcoming, but in the end, you're going to love what you see. I hope you loved what you saw here on Beyond 140. Remember, if you want to participate with a question or comment, you need to follow me on Twitter at Todd TVG.